Get yourself in the lotus position, because I've got no plan, no pretense, and definitely no bypassing. I'm Josh Connolly, and this will probably be dysfunctional. I'm fixing to go in today, so get yourself comfortable. I know I say it in the intro before you get here, but yeah, I'm feeling it today. You know what? I've always said with this podcast that I'm going to turn up and give you the version of myself that is the most authentic. That there is always a level of performance in terms of how people show up when you're creating content. It's almost unavoidable, right? If I'm having a day where I feel like I don't want to speak to anyone and I don't want to do anything, but I need to create content because it's part of what I do, then there's always going to be a level of performance. I'll tell you that today started off amazingly. I was buzzing to get in here. Some stuff's happened. And so then I feel right. And when you have an audience online and part of your work, like part of my work is to engage with that audience. When you are in a bad mood, like when I open my phone and go on social media, right? There's a barrage of comments. There's lots of love, but there's also like lots of hate and lots of fucking idiots sometimes. So when you're in a bit of a narky mood, which happens to all of us, we can all be in narky moods, right? And fucking me probably more than anybody. It's very easy to like open my social media and then just get fucking pulled in by some idiots. And that's happened today. And I just thought I'd share it with you because I think it's fucking what we're dealing with when it comes to like dysfunctional people, toxic people, whatever you want to call them. The level of enablism that I see out there, the level of people that just so lack in self-awareness. Sometimes, by the way, I interact with comments because for like research purposes, because I'm fascinated by why some people who claim to have no experience whatsoever of family dysfunction or toxic parents weighed in, clearly triggered, clearly activated, commenting on posts that they're claiming have absolutely no relevance to them whatsoever. They will always claim that they're doing it from a kind of altruistic place, right? A kind of like, you know, I'm just trying to protect humanity kind of space. But they're full of shit, right? There's obviously a reason why. And I just thought this interaction that I've had, though, to be clear, this interaction definitely is more born out of what I've just said. I'm in a bit of a narky mood, so I've ended up interacting with this person. But just a small interaction, just because I think it's fucking super interesting. So this woman has commented, right? She's a woman of, like you can see in her picture, she is probably in her 50s or her 60s, right? So she's of like a previous generation to mine is what I was going to say. I'm highlighting that because it's important, because you'll see in her first comment. But she also runs a company. I'm not going to say the name of it. But that I know that because that's her name. And sometimes I click on these people because I'm always interested. A lot of the ones that end up clearly being toxic and are fucking like outing themselves in my comments, when you click on their bio, they've often got family first on there, family over everything, live, love, laugh, positive vibes only, all that kind of stuff. I'm not digging you out if you have that on your profile, right? I understand that nice people have that too, but I'm just talking about the reality of this situation. But so I've clicked on her profile and she runs a company that deals with like kids' parties. So I think they do like face painting, and you like hire her to come and organize your kids' party, right? Which is super interesting. So her comment, which is on, by the way, a post of that went viral a long time ago, so still gets comments on it now, and it's about whether you should towel your toxic parent when you've gone no contact. And I essentially say, like I always say, every situation's completely different, but if this person has been toxic and abusive to you your whole life, then you don't owe them a reason why you've cut contact. And I think I say in the reel, although I haven't watched it for a while, that if you do interact with them and you do let them know, then you're just giving them another supply and another thing for them to fucking go on about. So I just say that in some cases, if you feel like you're not going to give them an explanation, you're just going to cut, then that totally makes sense. When we're talking about emotionally abusive people, especially when they're your parents, right? it just makes no rational sense if you're willing to get into truth. It makes no rational sense that you would engage with your abuser to let them know that you're cutting contact, right? And I'll fucking stand by that, by the way. But I always, like I do, always highlight every situation is different, right? So we're all on a continuum, and we're not talking necessarily about highly abusive people all of the time, right? I'm always really clear on that. So there's always a bit of me that when people suggest that I'm not, when people suggest that I'm pushing people to go no contact, there already has to be a sense that they're activated in some way, because that's just not true. That's just not what I do. And you don't have to look far at my body of work to recognize that. Anyway, this woman comes on and her first comment here is, who taught you to walk, feed yourself, comfort you, and help create your independence? ? And then sick millennials, she says. And let me just be clear about this, because this is one of the things that people come on and say is that this generation, millennials, I don't know the terms. Gen Z, what am I? I think I'm a millennial, right? But I'm not entirely sure of the terms. I fucking hate terms that group people together in that way anyway. But I get a lot of people of this ilk come on here and comment this and say, oh, it's this generation just cutting contact with people fucking willy-nilly, and like, you know, people are just cutting contact. They just need to learn communication skills and all that. Let me tell you this. If you want to talk about fucking generations, groups of generation people, the generation that this person comes from were fucking synonymous with suppressing abuse. Yeah, and making sure that people didn't talk about abuse and sweeping it under the fucking carpet. So if we're going to have that discussion, let's have that discussion, and we'll talk about how actually what's happening now is people are outing abuse and people are not allowing abuse. Yeah, so there's a bit of fucking accountability here that somebody needs to take. And you'll notice that my Aggie mood is coming through as I talk. So I've gone back to her and replied, by the way, who taught you to walk, feed yourself, comfort you? And so let's just think about the parents that I'm talking about. Maybe they might teach you to walk, I don't know, feed yourself perhaps, but comfort you and help you create independence. They will literally work to make you dependent upon them, right? Because they want to be the center of the universe, or they will fucking make themselves dependent on you and how you show up and make you abandon yourself. Comfort, fucking do me a favor. Like, do me a favor. Anyway, so I go back and I say, oh, you think all these things make abuse okay? Also, in many instances, children have to teach themselves a lot of these things. And then she's just said, exception, not the rule. I think, okay, right? That doesn't really mean anything, right? She's come back, but it doesn't really mean anything. So I've said, clearly, I'm not saying people should cut contact with any parents. My work is about toxic and abusive parents. What point are you trying to make here? For the record, abusive parents is a lot more common than people think. And if you're taking a swipe at millennials, I'll make the point that your generation were awful for covering up abuse. Then she comes back, and again, this is common. Are you a social worker by chance? Just wondering where you have got the stats from. I haven't got any stats. This is like, so this is, you know, this is common in these kind of people. Instead of debating what I'm talking about, what she's trying to do is render me crazy, right? Render what I'm saying as ridiculous and completely dumbfounded, rather than just like having a discussion. True, there are bad parents out there, but luckily I have not encountered them yet. Then what the fuck are you doing here? Why are you here? Why have you stopped on a post like this if you haven't encountered them yet? Yeah, so it's like a massive red flag to me. And what you'll find is these people, she's triggered because deep down within her consciousness, she's fucking probably one of the people that I'm talking about. Now, that is a massive leap for me to take, and probably, arguably, an unreasonable leap for me to take. But I've gone back and said, look, it's great that you haven't encountered them. Be grateful of that, and maybe refrain from having an opinion on a matter that you apparently have no experience in, to which she's not come back. Now, just to cover a couple of things, in normal circumstances, it's best to not engage with these people. There's a couple of reasons why I do it. Sometimes it's for research purposes. Sometimes I do it a little bit with content in mind, because I think, well, this helps. I'm going to fucking use these people to help me explain some of the narratives and some of the things that I talk about. Sometimes I do it because I'm niggly and narky. Niggly and fucking hell, it's a slight of tongue for you. Because I'm niggly and, hey, listen, by the way, I've talked about how I can be a bit fucking narky, but sometimes I do it like that. And it's very easy, I think, for anybody that doesn't have a platform to just throw out the just ignore them. But it ain't easy, man. It fucking ain't. And on a good day, when I'm well-rounded and in myself, then I would just ignore most of these things. That's the truth. But it's a bit like just saying just ignore them to the bullies. It's not that easy, man. It's not that easy. So yeah, listen, I just thought it'd be interesting to start there and go and talk about that. I was just checking if she had replied to that final comment, but she's not. So yeah, I don't know why I've gone there, but I think the point that I'm making is often that a lot of these interactions that do come out online, the ways that people engage with this kind of conversation is so interesting that somebody who is claiming to have no experience of this whatsoever has formulated such a big opinion on it. And more when I look into this stuff, and the more and more that I talk about dysfunction, the more and more that I actually believe that it's just the norm. And people get triggered at some level, at some state. So I know it in myself, yeah? Whenever I'm engaging in an interaction online, when I fucking want to be right and I want to make the other person look stupid, I'm triggered in some way, yeah? And if I'm unable to admit that to myself, and you normally can't when you're in the triggered state, it's quite hard to do that, right? To recognize that you're in a triggered state, it takes quite a bit of work to do that. If I'm in a triggered state, I will later have to look at that and think, why was I triggered so much by that? What was it about my experience? Who did I become in that moment? What part of me was so triggered by that? And I think as people in general, we don't do that. We've just reached this point now. Like self-advocacy has grown, which is great, fucking needed, right? And I'm part of like growing the idea of self-advocacy. But I think it also does make us sometimes become a little bit narcissistic. Not narcissists, narcissistic, which is very, very different. It's just a descriptive term. Something I'm going to talk about in a second, actually. We can become quite narcissistic, selfish in our nature. And hope that everybody else around us changes their behavior to make ourselves feel more comfortable. And this is what you see with the toxic people that come online. Listen, I'm talking about how we can all be guilty of this to a degree, but the highly toxic people who never reflect on themselves, they're never going to see themselves as triggered because they're part of themselves. They're always going to see themselves as triggered by the world out there. And just to touch on that quickly before I do move on to actually talking about what I want to talk about today. When I talk about becoming quite narcissistic, whenever we're using terminology to describe personality traits, it amazes me how we then start to think that they're fact. So you get a lot of people that will be like, wow, you shouldn't call somebody a narcissist because it takes a lot to actually fully diagnose somebody as a narcissist. And I'm like, yeah, but like that's just a piece of terminology that somebody's come up with to describe a certain bit of traits. So call them what you fucking want, really. It's not like diabetes where you got symptoms and then you do a blood test and then you go, well, diabetes is when your blood sugar levels are like this and it causes this. To say that somebody is a narcissist, you, like in any descriptive term that we use for people where there is no physical markers for it, we are basing on opinion. And we have to base that opinion on whatever we think is normal as well, by the way, to be able to get to something that is not normal. Okay, why don't we take a breath here? Let's do 2 big inhales through the nose and out through the mouth because I need them as much as anybody else. And out. And again, in through the nose. And out through the mouth. Good. All right, you absolute G's. That's what we're going to call you today. I want to talk today about forgiveness. The title of this podcast is going to be, Should You Forgive Your Toxic Parents? Or it might be something like that. I might change my mind by the time that it gets uploaded, but it's going to be along those lines. All right. I want to start by reading an excerpt from an incredible book called It's Them Not You, How to Break Free from Toxic Parents and Reclaim Your Story. It's written by an absolute G named Josh Connolly. I don't know if you know him, but you should follow him online. He can be a bit of a twat. Let me just read this piece on forgiveness here. So there's a whole chapter called Self-Compassion in my book. And let's read this bit here. The route to self-compassion is through forgiveness, but forgiveness is an overused term. It is thrown around in the healing space as if it is something that can be achieved by the click of your fingers. It is an ultimate ideal, and it is suggested that if you can reach forgiveness in any situation, you are more healed than those who cannot. Let's dispel that myth immediately. There are people in my life who have hurt me, who I have not forgiven, and who hold no power over me whatsoever. In other cases, forgiveness has shown up for me, but it is only as a result of the work that I have done on myself. I don't believe it is possible to just forgive. It comes as a byproduct of other self-work. I also don't believe it is essential to forgive anyone in your life, even your parent. Forgiveness of others is not the only route to freedom from their hurt. That may come as a relief to you, or it may feel uncomfortable, but it is the reality. This is something else you have likely had pushed on you if you dare to speak about the toxicity of your parent, that you should just simply forgive them, irrespective of the level of abuse and regardless of whether the abuse is still happening. This isn't a fair ask. Again, somewhere along the journey of healing, you may land at forgiveness, and that is great, but it is not a must. Forcing forgiveness can be detrimental for you having grown up with a toxic parent. It can serve to downplay the level of pain that you have experienced at the hands of someone who may even, in some cases, still be trying to abuse you. It is important to honor your feelings for what they are and not to feel pressured to be working towards new ones. Forcing yourself to move towards forgiveness can cloud your judgment and leave you more vulnerable to the abusive manipulation. It is simply more of the same spiritual bypassing that is a common trait of a toxic parent. It is an attempt to avoid the discomfort that comes with difficult emotions. I have been there, sweeping my true feelings under the carpet and spouting ideas of forgiveness and letting go. It doesn't work like that. I understand why it happens. To force yourself to believe you have reached forgiveness is more comfortable than one full of discomfort that comes with the truth of the experience. This is avoidance and becomes another barrier to you being able to be in your body in the way you need. Self-forgiveness, however, is something I want you to encourage you to think about. And that's the only form of forgiveness that is essential for you to work towards. So I just wanted to start there because I talk about it in the book, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. How much forgiveness is pushed, particularly within the kind of spiritual space, the spiritual realm, as in self-development, personal improvement, spiritual world that we see online. So I thought I would start by giving you a little bit of history of the origins and the evolution of forgiveness. I think most people know that forgiveness is in the way that we see it today, which is like freeing yourself from what you experience as the result of other people's actions. It's quite steeped in Christianity, and we can see some of that here. The word forgiveness originates from the Old English word, which says foreifan. I might be saying that wrong. Which combines for meaning completely and to give. And it's implied an act of giving away resentment or debt completely. Its root ideas date back to ancient cultures where forgiveness was often linked to notions of balance, mercy, and reconciliation. So it originates in this word, in this way of just like reconciliation, right, in the history. So that's not always possible. But its original, from what I can gather from what I've just said there, its original meaning lies in the act of giving away debt completely or resentment. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about resentment and how in the self-development spiritual world, resentment is only ever seen as bad. That can in some ways be problematic as well. Like there can be positive reasons that we might feel a level of resentment. Now, we'll get onto that in a minute because it can be dangerous as well, particularly for people like myself who struggle with addiction. But its basic origins, for what we can gather there, is there was no level of grace given here, right? So it was literally just about freeing yourself, which I'm all for, and I do believe that you should work towards. However, over the years, forgiveness developed in its meaning. Early Jewish texts like the Torah emphasized repentance as a persecutor to forgiveness. Forgiveness was seen as conditional, often requiring the offender to make amends. So that's how in early Jewish texts. In Christianity, Jesus' teachings in the New Testament placed forgiveness at the heart of Christian ethics. The Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. So that prayer is saying that, we ask for forgiveness and we will look to forgive everybody else. And Jesus obviously forgave his executioners with quite a famous line of, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." It made forgiveness a central tenet of Christian life. This helped embed the idea into Western culture. Now, I would argue that organized religion in the way that it does then took forgiveness, and as we're going to see, and I'm going to talk about in a bit, it can then be manipulated and used as a way of allowing perpetrators to get away with further abuses of power. And this is really, really important. When we're talking about power structures, and within a family, there is a particular power structure with your parent, right? And children, there is a power structure with parents, like a very clear power structure. And we need to be very, very aware of that, right? And so if your abuser is your parent, they have incredible power over you. And that, I believe, that kind of power structure remains into your adulthood. That kind of, could we call it implicit hold over you, that implicit power that a parent has over you, can be driven by that desire and that want to forgive them, that want to let them back in. And so when you understand that, you've got to be really, really careful where you push forgiveness. Because if it's in an abusive relationship of any kind, and you're pushing forgiveness and reconciliation, or not reconciliation, but you're just pushing forgiveness, you can bring down those walls, you can bring down those barriers that may have been created through safety. So resentment in that instant, if a victim of abuse resents their abuser to the extent that they don't allow them in their life, that could be a level of safety that is created there. Now, you could obviously argue that you could jump forward and go, well, get rid of your resentment and have clear boundaries. But that's a fucking lot of work if you've been trapped in an abusive relationship. And when we're talking about parents, it's for your fucking life. So there's a matter of safety here that's really important. When we take the kind of forgiveness that we're talking about that is rooted in that Christianity. Now, just for a little bit of balance, it's worth mentioning that in Islam, forgiveness is a divine attribute in Islam, and believers are encouraged to forgive others to emulate Allah's mercy. However, justice and forgiveness are balanced with an emphasis on intention and accountability. Well, I fucking love the intent, the emphasis being on accountability there, right? I feel like that's something that we really, really lack in Western culture. There's a piece here on ancient Greece. While forgiveness wasn't central in early Greek philosophy, concepts of clemency and reconciliation were discussed. Aristotle and Socrates talked about tempering anger with rationality rather than vengeance, which again is interesting. If you want to take that idea that we should become very rational rather than becoming vengeance. So rather than seeking revenge, we need to be rational about what's right here. Well, then moving on is better. And so to forgive the ancient Greeks in that sense, the ancient Greeks didn't feel the need for it based on what's been said here. So when we start to look at examples of when forgiveness may have happened over the year, and by the way, I'm a big user of ChatGPT now. So it's ChatGPT that has got a lot of this stuff. So it is worth researching all of this further, right? But one thing that really caught my eye, because I wanted examples of forgiveness over history. Post World War II, Germany obviously sought forgiveness from the Holocaust survivors and the Jewish communities. While this led to reconciliation in some cases, it also highlighted the complexity of forgiveness when justice is incomplete. Now, this is this is where we get into the nuts and crannies of what's really important here. When we push forgiveness where justice is incomplete, this is where it starts to become a problem. Think about that in terms of like domestic abuse. And I've written here, societal pressures to forgive has often kept victims in abusive relationships, as seen in many patriarchal societies where women are urged to forgive for the sake of the family. Go back to what I was talking about before we started the concept of forgiveness, talking about that lady who was talking about, fucking stupid millennials or whatever. And I talked about back in generations, particularly, and it's not gone away, by the way, it's still rife now. But particularly back then, the patriarchy particularly wanted women to just fucking shut up and get on with the abusive relationship. You might have married into it, so fucking tough. Sweep it under the carpet. Allow that power structure, that abuse of power, and the abuse in every other way that it goes on. Allow that to continue for the sake of the family. Hugely problematic. Yeah. Historically, forgiveness has been weaponized by institutions to maintain power dynamics. For example, and I've talked a little bit about this, religious absolution was used to control guilt and compliance, right? So you can see how that happens in family dynamics as well. What toxic parents will often do, right? Or that position of power that we just talked about, push you and wait for you to fuck up. And this is a kind of like... you could see this as a kind of reactive abuse. Push you to fuck up, push you to do things that they can then scapegoat you for, right? And then they can then make you be compliant for as well. You'll see this play out in abusive relationships of any kind. This kind of reactive abuse, push the person to react erratically under the abuse, and then you can use that against them for compliance. Yeah, you see that all of the time. Social narratives are often demand forgiveness from marginalized groups, examples being victims of racism or sexism, without addressing systematic harm. Again, we see this all of the time, yeah? So then I wanted some more information of what happened after World War II, right? Acknowledgement ago, after World War II, the newly established West German government under Chancellor Konrad Adenauer formally acknowledged the atrocities committed during the Holocaust. This was a groundbreaking move in international politics. As such, a direct acknowledgement of guilt by a nation was unprecedented. The government sought reconciliation with Jewish communities, especially through dialogue with Israel and Jewish organizations like the World Jewish Congress. Germany took significant steps to ensure the Holocaust was remembered, such as establishing memorials, museums, and educational programs. So it's like they're really looking towards the restoration here. The German population was divided. Many Germans of the post-war generation felt shame and guilt for their country's actions, even though they had not participated directly in the atrocities. However, others resisted the narrative of collective guilt, leading to tensions between survivors seeking acknowledgement and Germans grappling with inherited responsibility. Forgiveness became a double-edged sword. Survivors who forgave were sometimes criticized by other survivors for letting Germans off the hook, while Germans who sought forgiveness were accused of wanting to erase or downplay the past. For decades, many Holocaust survivors did not speak openly about their experience, often due to the pain of revisiting their memories or the fear that they would not be believed. This silence further complicated the idea of forgiveness, as the collective understanding of the Holocaust's full impact remained incomplete for years. So then you have the symbolic gestures. German leaders, including Chancellor Willy Brandt, made symbolic gestures of contribution, such as Brandt's kneeling at the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial in 1970. While these acts were powerful, they could not erase the scars of the past or undo the damage done. So forgiveness is an ongoing dialect. dialogue. The process of forgiveness in this context remains a living dialogue. It is less about a single act of absolution and more about the continuing effort to honor the memories of victims, hold perpetrators accountable, and prevent history from repeating itself. So the reason that becomes important in the conversation that I'm trying to have with you here and that I'm trying to talk about, and sorry if that felt a little bit kind of wordy and heavy for you, but let me try and summarize why that's important. When we push forgiveness on the victims or on the abused or on the people that have fallen foul to what they've experienced without pushing accountability, it becomes complex and problematic. And when we're talking about toxic parents, when we're talking about abusive parents, in the instance that I'm talking about specifically here, we're often talking about people who may still be alive, right? May still be out there smear campaigning you, may still be trying to find a way back in to abuse you. You may still be in contact with them. And so you're still experiencing this kind of on-off level of neglect or abuse or gaslighting or whatever you may be experiencing and still experiencing it. When the spiritual community and the self-improvement community pushes this idea that you should just forgive and that the only route is forgiveness, and in doing that you just free yourself, you expel them from that, and then you move on, it leaves this like piece of grace that actually through the evolution of the word forgiveness that there now is, right? There is a level of grace that you're supposed to be given to that other person. So then it becomes complex because you have to, what you're doing is, if you want to, that notion of forgiveness, I've forgiven my parents and I'm moving on, you have to suppress the fact that the abuse is still continuing. And so then boundaries and accountability in the way that's needed in a collective society to be within a healthy and functional system, demographic of people, that needs to happen, right? That level needs to happen. And it can't happen if you're pushing forgiveness when abuse is still trying to happen, or it's very difficult. So I talk about moving on, breaking free, which is in the title of the book, which actually goes, I'm going to recognize exactly what's going on here. I'm not going to give you grace. I'm not going to give you any kind of a grace. I'm not going to talk about forgiveness because I am going to refuse, and you don't have to do this, and I'll talk about this in a second, but I'm going to refuse to do that while there's no accountability there. And actually, I'm going to talk about how that piece over here needs to change, but I am going to move on and break free. Slightly different here to full forgiveness. Now, when your parent perhaps dies and so the abuse is no longer there at all, you may then be able to move on to forgiveness, right? You may work through your journey. You may be able to reach a place where you can then zoom out and see that, you know, your parent was like they were because of what they experienced when they was a child and all of that stuff, right? And you may get there, and that's great if you do get there, and then you find a level of freedom from that. But again, that's down the line. That's down the line when there is a gap of safety. There's no way that the abuse is going to be able to continue, and it takes a level of working through some other stuff to be able to get there, and it takes a level of working through that free from the abuse. While the person is still alive, there's a very good chance they're still out there abusing you. So I really believe when you start to see the complexities of forgiveness in the way that we're talking about here. So it's written here, the historical moments highlight how forgiveness, when paired with incomplete justice, becomes a deeply personal, often divisive, and multifaceted process. It reveals that forgiveness is not just about reconciliation, it's also about addressing power dynamics, accountability, and the survivor's right to define their own paths to healing. Let me say that again. The survivor's right to define their own path to healing. When you push forgiveness on people as the only route, you ignore power dynamics, you ignore accountability, and you ignore the survivor's right to do what's right for them post-abuse. And that's really, really important. people must be supported into navigating their own journey through abuse, not pushed a form of forgiveness that ignores these historical contexts, that ignores accountability, that ignores power dynamics. Give people that have suffered at the hands of abuse within these power dynamics, give them the grace of finding the journey that works for them. Take away your need to push forgiveness. I really think it's so important here in what we're talking about. And this is why I always land at forgiveness is one route. You can land there if that's right for you. And it's great if you have forgiven. But give people on their healing journey the grace to find the route that works for them. Should you forgive your toxic parent? That is solely a personal journey. But because the question says should, the answer is no. There are no shoulds. Can you? Yes. Do you have to? No. It's a very, very personal journey, and it's up to you to explore in your own way. And what I hope, and I feel like we're coming to a natural close here, but what I hope and what I wish that we would push more of, I wish we could push for accountability in the way that we push for forgiveness. I wish that we could say, let's look for accountability. And that's all we're talking about here. And I've talked extensively about this, and I talk extensively about this all the time. Most people are both good and bad. I'm glad that forgiveness exists because I have needed it in my life and will continue to need it from the people that I love. Look, parents make mistakes, right? Parents will get a lot wrong. I will get a lot wrong. I hope my children can forgive me for that. I hope we can work together against any injustices that were caused. I hope we can work against the misuse of the power dynamics that I have as a parent, right? I'm glad that forgiveness exists. You know, if your parent did something bad when you were young and they've changed, I hope that you can work towards forgiveness in that. But when we're talking about the power dynamics and the relationships with toxic and abusive parents, like I'm talking about, it's different. That's why we have to allow the journey. I love forgiveness. I think it's great to forgive people when they're willing to look towards accountability, when they're willing to create change, when they're willing to address their own abuses of power. Yeah, willing to, because it's not always easy to. I think most of us need forgiving, probably more than we wished we do, if we were being gut level honest. And everybody's journey is different. And when we're talking about really toxic and abusive people, it's a fucking whole other ball game. Board game and ball game. All right. Maybe that's the moment to stop here. Let me just take a breath and think if there's anything else I want to say. I guess, and I've kind of highlighted this point, it's a very personal journey. What makes me really uncomfortable is this constant push by people that forgiveness is the only way, because it's not. It's really not. And you don't have to forgive somebody that's abusing you. And if you're still being abused, this is the part that I'm going to hit home. Yeah. If you're still navigating the structures of that power dynamic that you fell to abuse as a result of, then you don't have to forgive. You can hold your resentment. Now, listen, I'm somebody that's sober. To be resentful for me can be really problematic, can be really dangerous. Actually, resentment can lead to a lot of self-loathing. So I need to forgive that as much as I can. But I will hold strong in seeing people for exactly as they are and judging people rationally on how they show up. You know, the saying is, if people show you who they are, believe them. And I hate fucking one-liners, but it's a good one, isn't it? All right. I'm going to leave it there. Listen, I'm always open to hearing from you as a, result of the things that I say. I'm open to changing my mind. I'm open to seeing things differently. And 2025 is going to see guests coming on here. So if you're somebody that strongly believes in forgiveness, that you've listened to everything that I've laid out and you think I'm wrong, message me and let's do a podcast and we can have a fucking row about it. We can debate about it, see if we can change one another's minds. Maybe we will. And if we don't, then maybe we can just forgive each other. All right, listen. I've been Josh Connolly. And as always, this was definitely dysfunctional. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional. So thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.